College campuses are supposed to be about learning, exploring, finding your voice, but lately they've become battlegrounds. Students are raising their voices against injustice, and governments are trying to silence them. From climate change to racial equality, students are demanding action. They're organizing protests, staging sit-ins, and making their voices heard. But there's a growing pushback. Governments see these protests as disruptive and dangerous. They're bringing in laws, regulations, and even police force to control what students can and can't say on campus. It's a slippery slope. When does legitimate protest become a threat to national security? And who gets to decide? Throughout history, young people have been at the forefront of change. They challenge the status quo, push boundaries, and demand a better world. This isn't just about students. This is about the fundamental right to free speech. Stay tuned, because things are about to get real. The government likes to have its say, but when it comes to student protests, things get complicated. They argue they need to maintain order and protect national security. But when governments start dictating what can and can't be said on campus, that's a big red flag. It smacks of censorship, of trying to control the narrative and silence voices they find inconvenient. The right to protest is enshrined in many democracies. When governments start chipping away at that right, they're chipping away at the very foundations of a free society. So next time you see students marching, remember what's at stake. Universities are supposed to be marketplaces of ideas, right? Places where minds clash, perspectives collide, and knowledge is born out of rigorous debate. But lately it feels like these marketplaces are being replaced by echo chambers. Universities have a responsibility to create a safe and inclusive learning environment. But where's the line between protecting students and stifling debate? Real learning requires grappling with uncomfortable truths and engaging with diverse perspectives. When universities shy away from that, they fail in their mission to educate and empower the next generation. If students can't handle dissenting views on campus, how will they navigate the complexities of the real world? Universities should be preparing students for that reality, not shielding them from it. And let's get specific. Harvard and Columbia are practically poster children for campus crackdowns. At Harvard, a student-led protest against fossil fuel investments sparked outrage. Students occupied buildings, disrupted events, and faced disciplinary action. The administration argued the protests were disruptive. Students argued their actions were justified. Over at Columbia, protests erupted over sexual assault cases, racial justice issues, and labor disputes. Students organized demonstrations, occupied buildings, and clashed with security. The administration responded with disciplinary action and even called in the police. These cases highlight the tension between students demanding social justice and university administrations. They raise questions about the balance between free speech and institutional authority. These debates will continue to shape the relationship between universities, students, and society. Universities are meant to be spaces for intellectual exploration and open dialogue. Standing up for what you believe in often comes at a price. It's a courageous act that requires a lot of strength and conviction. For students engaged in protests, that price can be steep. They often face disciplinary actions from their educational institutions. Imagine getting suspended or expelled for participating in a protest. These are not just minor setbacks. They can have long-lasting effects on a student's academic and professional future. But it goes beyond that. The repercussions can be far-reaching and multifaceted. Students risk damaging their reputations, facing social ostracism, and jeopardizing their future career prospects. The stigma attached to being a protester can follow them for years. Protesting can be stressful, exhausting, and emotionally draining. The mental toll it takes is often underestimated. Students have been arrested, charged, and even jailed for participating in protests. Legal battles can drain their resources and energy. Think about it. Young people full of idealism and passion, risking their futures to fight for what they believe in. Their commitment is both inspiring and daunting. They're the ones who will inherit the consequences of our inaction. Their activism is a call to action for all of us. It's easy to judge, but ask yourself, what are you willing to risk for your beliefs? Would you have the same courage to stand up for what you think is right? These students are putting their money where their mouths are, and that takes guts. Their bravery is a testament to their dedication, so the next time you see a student protest, remember the sacrifices they're making. They're not just fighting for themselves, but for a better future for all of us. And ask yourself, what can I do to support their right to fight for a better future? Whether it's through joining them, spreading awareness, or simply offering moral support, every bit helps. These students spend countless hours organizing, planning, and executing these protests. Their dedication is unwavering. They collaborate, strategize, and work together to make their voices heard. It's a collective effort that requires unity and solidarity. When you see them holding signs and chanting slogans, remember that each one of them has a story, a reason for being there. They often face opposition, sometimes even from their peers, yet they stand firm, undeterred by the challenges. And when they achieve small victories, those moments of triumph are hard-earned and deeply cherished. As they reflect on their journey, they look to the future with hope and determination. Their fight is far from over, but their spirit remains unbroken. These students are not just making noise, they are inspiring change and making a difference. Their actions today will shape the world of tomorrow. United for a cause, they exemplify the power of collective activism. Together, they are a force to be reckoned with. Their legacy of activism will pave the way for future generations. They are the torchbearers of change, lighting the path for others to follow. While peaceful protest is a cornerstone of democracy, things can get out of hand. So where do we draw the line? When does passionate activism turn into something more sinister? Violence is never the answer. It's counterproductive and dangerous. Destruction of property is illegal and disrespectful. Disrupting the peace by blocking traffic or shutting down public transportation crosses a line. Protests should be about amplifying voices, not silencing them. Threatening or harassing others is unacceptable. Emotions run high during protests, but our actions have consequences. The right to protest is precious, but it comes with responsibilities. Those who choose to exercise that right must do so peacefully and within the bounds of the law. Only then can we ensure that our voices are heard and our movements for change are effective. Enter Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, with a penchant for stirring the pot. DeSantis has made Florida a battleground in the fight over campus protests. He's signed legislation that restricts how race and gender can be taught in schools and universities. Critics say he's trying to whitewash history and stifle academic freedom. DeSantis has pushed for stricter penalties for students who engage in disruptive protests. His argument? That universities should be focused on academics, not on political activism. Critics argue that DeSantis is using his political influence to silence dissent. DeSantis's actions have sparked a nationwide debate about the role of government in higher education. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, and it's only going to get more heated. To understand the significance of what's happening on campuses today, we need to take a trip down memory lane. Back in the 1980s, a powerful student-led movement swept across university campuses. The fight against apartheid in South Africa. Students organized protests, boycotts, and divestment campaigns. They demanded their universities cut all ties with companies doing business with the apartheid regime. These protests weren't always popular. They were accused of being disruptive and divisive, but the students persisted and their efforts had a profound impact. The divestment movement gained momentum, contributing to the eventual dismantling of apartheid. The parallels to today's campus protests are striking. Once again, students are at the forefront of demanding social and political change. Their voices deserve to be heard, their demands deserve to be taken seriously, and their courage deserves our admiration. The debate over campus protests and government crackdowns is about as nuanced as a sledgehammer to a butterfly. On one side, you've got the folks who argue that enough is enough. They say these protests have gone too far, disrupting education and causing chaos. They argue that universities need to maintain order and protect free speech for all. They believe that stricter rules and harsher penalties are necessary. On the other side, you've got those who argue that cracking down on campus protests is an attack on free speech. They believe that universities should be spaces for open dialogue and debate. They argue that cracking down on protests creates a chilling effect, silencing dissent. The question is, where do we go from here? How do we find a balance between protecting free speech and ensuring that universities remain places of learning? How do we protect the right to free speech while ensuring that protests remain peaceful, productive, and respectful? Universities need to create clear guidelines for acceptable protest. They also need to provide support for student activism. Students have a responsibility to engage in responsible protest. Governments should focus on creating spaces for dialogue and engagement. The media has a responsibility to provide nuanced, accurate coverage. Finding the balance between free speech and responsible protest is an ongoing process. Silencing dissent is never the answer. It only breeds resentment and fuels extremism. Let's keep talking, keep listening, and keep searching for that elusive balance.